I arrived at the rehearsal dinner to find no seat for the insignificant wife, so I set the timer on their downfall. Watch as one champagne toast turns $1 million wedding into the total collapse of a family empire. Before continuing, write where you are from or what time it is. The invitation felt like a slab of cold marble in my hands, its weight outmatching my wedding ring, and the 3 years of quiet misery I'd spent in the Cara family. For 36 months, I had been the scholarship girl who snagged the air, the outsider tolerated only as long as I stayed invisible and silent. Bianca Cara, my husband's viciously perfect sister, made sure of that with every smirk and every calculated omission. But as I stared at the thick ivory card announcing her engagement to Alexander Hartley III, I didn't feel the usual sting of exclusion. I felt the first click of a master plan falling into place. The social event of the decade was coming, and I was going to be the one to turn the lights out on the entire empire. Victor came home that evening with a nervous energy that made him grip his briefcase until his knuckles turned white. He didn't look like a man whose sister was marrying into one of the most powerful shipping dynasties on the eastern seaboard. He looked like a man standing on a trap door. He watched me set the invitation on the kitchen counter, his eyes darting to the elaborate calligraphy. Mother says this wedding is going to boost company stock by 5% before the first toast is even poured, he said, his voice trying for excitement, but landing on trepidation. How romantic, I replied. My voice as flat as the paper. Victor missed the sarcasm, pacing the length of our kitchen. It's not just about romance, Hannah. You know that. The Hartleys control the shipping routes we need. We have the distribution network they've been trying to build for 10 years. It's a perfect match. I watched him, wondering if he even realized he was talking about his sister like a corporate merger. To the Caras, people were just assets to be traded or liabilities to be liquidated. I had been a liability for 3 years, and Bianca was the one who kept the ledger. The memory of the gala a few weeks prior still burned in my throat like bad champagne. Bianca had stood at the head table, the Swarovski crystal chandelier reflecting in her eyes like ice. She had waited for the room to fall silent before delivering a toast that was actually a public execution. She'd called Damien Lambert, a man who had built his empire from nothing, a vulture. She'd mocked his appearance and his business tactics in front of the very investors her father needed to survive. I had seen the color drain from Nathaniel Cara's face as his daughter destroyed years of delicate networking in 60 seconds of arrogant cruelty. Victor, did you see Damien's face at the gala? I asked, leaning against the counter. He shrugged, already distracted by his phone. Dad smoothed it over. He always does. Bianca's just high-spirited. She's a predator, Victor, I thought. But I didn't say it. I didn't need to. I had already made a call to Zoe Lambert, Damien's daughter, and my only real friend in this Shark Tank. Zoe had confirmed what I suspected. Damien wasn't smoothing anything over. He was looking for an exit strategy, and Bianca had just given him the shove he needed. I checked my own phone. A message from Zoe sat in my inbox, a simple time and a location. The foundation of the Cara Empire was built on sand, and the tide was finally coming in. I looked back at the invitation, the 10-carat cushion-cut diamond Bianca was already flaunting, and press photos flashed in my mind. She thought she was ascending to the throne. She had no idea she was walking onto a sinking ship. I'm going to go freshen up, I told Victor, kissing his cheek. I walked to our home office and closed the door, the click of the lock sounding like a starting pistol. I pulled out a burner phone I'd bought a week ago and dialed a number I knew by heart. It was time to move the timeline up. The rehearsal dinner was only days away, and I wanted to make sure the fireworks started early. Damien answered on the second ring, his voice glacial and alert. Hannah, Is everything ready? The merger is built on a lie, I said, my voice steady. Alexander's father is liquidating personal assets to cover their debt. They're as desperate as the Caras are. Damien's chuckle was low and dangerous. Perfect. I'll move the share liquidation to tomorrow night. During the dinner, justice is a dish best served in front of a live audience, I replied. I hung up and sat in the dark, the quiet hum of anticipation buzzing beneath my skin. For 3 years, I had been the insignificant wife, the woman who wasn't born into money and therefore didn't belong. Tomorrow night, the world would see exactly what happens when you underestimate the person you've spent years trying to erase. The rehearsal dinner was a sea of midnight blue and silver, an exclusive restaurant overlooking the city skyline that felt more like a boardroom than a celebration. Crystal chandeliers cast a warm, artificial glow over the gathered elite, but the air felt thin, charged with the kind of tension that precedes a lightning strike. I wore a gown of midnight blue, blending into the shadows of the room, exactly where Bianca wanted me. She had arranged the seating with her usual strategic malice, placing my card between 2 elderly aunts at the table furthest from the bridal party. Victor offered to move me when he saw the placement, but I gripped his arm. It's fine, Victor. I'm happy right where I am. From my vantage point, I could see the entire head table. Bianca was a vision in a silver-sheathed dress, her $8 million jewelry collection on full display. She preened like a queen, her hand strategically positioned to catch the light so her diamond could blind anyone who looked too closely. Across from her, Alexander Hartley looked like a man who was counting the minutes until he could leave, his eyes glued to his phone, even as his father, Mr. Hartley Sr., tried to maintain an air of triumph. I checked my watch. 7:45 p.m. Zoe Lambert was across the room, catching my eye for a brief second. She gave a microscopic nod. Her father's team had been executing the share liquidation for the last 18 hours. The financial news outlets had been tipped off. The fuse was lit, and the spark was traveling fast. At precisely 8 p.m., Nathaniel Cara rose from his seat, champagne glass held high. The murmur of conversation died down. This was the moment he had leveraged everything for. Members, Nathaniel began, his voice. Members, Nathaniel began, his voice booming with the practiced resonance of a man used to getting his way. We gather tonight on the eve of a momentous occasion. Not just a union of 2 people, but the joining of 2 great legacies. I took a small sip of my wine, savoring the bitterness. Tomorrow, when Bianca and Alexander exchange vows, they will be forging a future of unprecedented prosperity, growth, and... His phone buzzed loudly against the table. Nathaniel frowned, his eyes flickering toward the screen. He silenced it with a sharp flick of his thumb and continued, "A future that will redefine our industry." Phones began to chime all over the room. A discordant symphony of notifications broke the silence. I watched Mr. Hartley Sr. pull his device from his pocket. His face went from flushed with wine to the color of wet ash in 3 seconds. He didn't even wait for Nathaniel to finish. "Nathaniel," he interrupted, his voice a strangled rasp. "The stock." "Look at the stock." Nathaniel's own phone rang again, a distinctive tone he reserved only for his most critical business calls. He excused himself with a strained smile that looked like it might crack his face. I watched him through the glass partition as he stepped into the corridor. The transformation was fascinating. Disbelief turned to rage, then to something that looked a lot like a heart attack. He reappeared a moment later, his face contorted. "What do you mean he's withdrawn?" he screamed, his voice shattering the elegant atmosphere. The glass he'd been holding hit the floor, shards of crystal spraying across the marble. The room froze. Bianca's hand flew to her throat, clutching her necklace. "Father?" Nathaniel didn't even look at her. He was shouting into his phone, spittle flying from his lips. Call him back. Tell Lambert he can't do this. The announcement isn't until Monday. But the room was already ahead of him. Guests were reading their screens aloud. The words, Cara Industries plummets 43%, rippling through the crowd like a virus. Lambert Enterprises severs all ties. Hartley Global expected to withdraw from merger talks. Mr. Hartley Sr. swayed on his feet, missing the edge of the table as he collapsed face first into his chocolate souffle. The chaos was instantaneous. Waiters rushed to his aid, while business associates scrambled for the exits, frantic to call their brokers before the floor dropped out from under them. In the center of it all, Bianca stood statue still. Her perfect world wasn't just cracking, it was vaporizing. She looked at Alexander, but he was already on his phone, his back turned to her as he barked orders to his financial team. The gesture said everything. When forced to choose between a bride and a fortune, there was no contest. Bianca's eyes scanned the room, wild with desperation, until they landed on me. I remained in my seat, calmly lifting my glass. I didn't smile. I didn't need to. The look in my eyes told her everything she needed to know about who had set the timer on her downfall. By midnight, the restaurant was a graveyard of abandoned appetizers and half-full champagne glasses. The Hartleys had vanished, Alexander trailing behind his father, without so much as a backward glance at the woman who was supposed to be his wife. The Cara family returned to their estate in a silence so thick it felt like it was choking the air out of the car. The house, which had been transformed with thousands of dollars in floral arrangements for the next day's ceremony, now felt like a funeral parlor. Bianca disappeared upstairs, her screams of rage echoing through the vents, while Nathaniel locked himself in his study with a bottle of scotch and a legal team that sounded increasingly hopeless over the speakerphone. I found Victor in the kitchen, staring at a stack of wedding favors that would now never be handed out. He looked like he'd aged a decade in 4 hours. Is it really that bad? I asked, my voice soft, playing the role of the concerned wife one last time. Victor ran a hand through his hair, his eyes bloodshot. It's worse. Dad leveraged everything on this merger. The house, the jet, our personal accounts. He was hiding liquidity issues, hoping the Hartley capital would plug the holes. Now that Lambert has pulled out, the SEC is already sniffing around for insider trading. He looked up at me, a flicker of something perceptive in his gaze. You didn't seem surprised, Hannah. At the dinner. You just sat there. I walked over and placed a hand on his shoulder. I've been watching the numbers for months, Victor. You were all too busy planning a coronation to notice the palace was on fire. I left him there and went to the master suite. My bags were already packed, tucked hidden in the back of the closet. I didn't need much. I had the only asset that mattered, the truth. The next morning, the news was even more brutal. The business press was calling it Black Tuesday. The Cara empire was being dismantled by creditors before the sun was fully up. I walked down the hall and past Bianca's room. The door was open. Her designer gown hung on the closet door, a mocking ghost of ivory splendor. She was sitting on the floor, surrounded by jewelry boxes, her hair tangled and her makeup smeared. Are you happy? She hissed when she saw me. You enjoyed every second of it, didn't you? I leaned against the doorframe, watching her. You spent 3 years making sure I knew I didn't belong, Bianca. You treated people like tools, and the world like your personal playground. You didn't lose your empire because of me. You lost it because you were too arrogant to realize that even vultures need a place to land. I walked away before she could respond, heading downstairs to find Nathaniel. He was sitting at his desk, the once imposing man looking small and defeated. The phone was ringing off the hook, but he wasn't answering. "I'm leaving, Nathaniel," I said, standing in the doorway. He looked up, his eyes vacant. "Victor?" "Victor is staying to help you clean up the mess," I said, "but I'm done. I married into this family thinking there was something real behind the gold leaf. I was wrong. I walked out of the estate and didn't look back." Zoe was waiting for me at the end of the long, winding driveway in a black SUV. I climbed in, and for the first time in years, I took a breath that didn't feel like it was being taxed. "Where to?" Zoe asked, her eyes sparking with a mixture of respect and dark humor. "To the lawyers," I said. "I want to make sure the evidence of Nathaniel's creative accounting finds the right desk. Justice shouldn't just be felt, it should be documented." As we drove away, I saw the first of the moving trucks arriving at the gates. The Kara name was being stripped from the building, and for the first time in my life, I felt like I truly belonged to myself. 10 days after the rehearsal dinner disaster, the air in the lawyer's conference room felt like a tomb. The mahogany table was covered in documents that detailed the final liquidation of the Kara family assets. Nathaniel sat at the far end, his designer suit rumpled, looking like a man who had forgotten how to breathe. Bianca was there too, her eyes red-rimmed and sharp, still fighting a war that was already lost. "The Manhattan apartment must be sold immediately," the attorney said, sliding a thick packet across the table, "as well as the Hamptons property, the vineyard in Napa, and the private jet." "What about my personal assets?" Bianca demanded, her voice rising to that frantic pitch I'd come to know so well. "My jewelry collection is insured for $8 million. That's mine." The lawyer cleared his throat, not looking her in the eye. "I'm afraid most of those pieces were purchased through corporate accounts as business expenses or tax write-offs. Since the company is in receivership, those items have already been inventoried for liquidation. That's impossible." Bianca slammed her palm on the table, her 10-carat diamond catching the light one last time. "My father gave me these. Your father used company money to buy your affection. Bianca," I said from my seat near the door, "the paper trail is quite clear." She lunged toward me, but Victor caught her arm, pulling her back. "Enough, Bianca. It's over." We left the office in a silence that was broken only by the sound of Bianca's heels clicking frantically against the marble. In the elevator, Victor turned to me, his expression unreadable. He had lost everything: his status, his fortune, his future. But when he looked at me, there was a strange kind of clarity in his eyes. "Will you stay?" he asked. "Now that the money is gone?" I looked at the man I had married, the one who had been kind while his family was cruel, the one who had finally seen the truth when it was too late to save himself. "Do you think I married you for the stock options, Victor?" "I wouldn't blame you if you had," he said, a sad smile touching his lips. "It's what everyone else wanted from us." I reached out and took his hand. "I married you because you were the only one in that house who didn't look through me. But I won't live in the wreckage of your father's lies. If we're going to do this, we start from zero." We moved into a modest brownstone in Brooklyn 2 weeks later. It was a far cry from the penthouse, with scuffed hardwood floors and a kitchen that didn't have a built-in espresso machine, but the sunlight that streamed through the windows felt real. Victor took a teaching position at a local business school, trading the boardroom for a classroom. He looked happier than I'd ever seen him, unburdened by the toxic expectations of the Kara legacy. I was sitting on our small balcony one evening, watching the sunset over the city, when a courier arrived with a package. It was a small velvet pouch with no return address. Inside lay a strand of perfect South Sea pearls. I recognized them instantly. Bianca had worn them to my wedding, making sure to tell everyone they were worth more than my entire dowry. There was a note inside from Zoe. Found these in the asset seizure. My father thought you might appreciate a trophy for the real winner. I turned the pearls over in my hand. For years, these had been a symbol of my exclusion. Now they were just cold stones. I didn't want them. I didn't want anything that reminded me of that life. The next morning, I made an anonymous donation to the Children's Cancer Research Charity that Damian Lambert supported. I sent the pearls along with a note specifying they be auctioned at their next fundraiser. The irony was perfect. Bianca's symbols of status would finally fund a cause she had only used as a backdrop for her social climbing. As I walked away from the courier service, my phone buzzed. It was a message from an unknown number with a Swiss area code. I opened it to find a photograph of a postcard. It was a picture of the Starlight Gala, the very moment Bianca had raised her glass to insult Damian. There was no text, just the image. I knew it was from her. It was an acknowledgement. She finally understood that the ripple she'd created had finally made it back to her shore. I felt a weight lift from my shoulders, a closure I hadn't realized I needed. The scales were balanced. Justice, cold and precise, had been served. But as I walked back toward our new home, I realized the real revenge wasn't the downfall of the Caras. It was the fact that I was the only one who had survived the wreck with my soul intact. 6 months had passed since the name Kara had been stripped from the skyline, and the city seemed to move on with its usual brutal indifference. I was settling into a life that didn't require a tactical map to navigate. Victor was thriving in his classroom, his natural charm finally finding a purpose that didn't involve inflating stock prices. We were happy, or as close to it as two people living in the shadow of a collapsed empire could be. But the past has a way of knocking on the door, just when you think you've locked it for good. I was at our local coffee shop when I saw a man who looked hauntingly familiar. He was sitting in the corner, wearing a simple button-down and khakis, his luxury watch replaced by a cheap plastic one. It was Nathaniel. He looked diminished, the commanding aura of the great Nathaniel Cara, replaced by the quiet stillness of a man who had run out of people to yell at. He saw me and didn't look away. Instead, he stood up and approached my table. "Hannah," he said, his voice raspy, "can I sit?" I gestured to the chair, my heart rate steady. I wasn't afraid of him anymore. He had no power here. "I owe you an apology," he began, staring into his coffee cup. "When Victor first brought you home, I saw you as a liability, someone who didn't understand the rules of the game we were playing." "You were right, Nathaniel," I said. "I didn't understand the rules because I didn't realize the game was rigged from the start." He nodded, a ghost of a smile touching his lips. "You were the only one who saw us clearly. You saw Bianca for what she was, and you saw what I was becoming. I thought giving her everything would make up for what she'd lost when her mother died. I just created a monster who ended up eating us both." "How is she?" I asked, surprised by the lack of malice in my own voice. Nathaniel sighed. "She's in Switzerland. Her cousin Marcus runs a finishing school there. He offered her a job teaching etiquette. Can you imagine? Bianca Cara teaching manners to teenagers? It's a glorified exile, but it's all she has left." We sat in silence for a moment, the hum of the coffee shop filling the space between us. I realized then that my revenge was complete. I didn't need him to suffer more. He was already living in the reality he had built. "I'm starting a new firm," he said suddenly, looking up. "It's small, just me and a desk. I'm doing consultancy for small businesses, people who actually make things." "Good for you, Nathaniel," I said, and I meant it. As I walked home, I felt a strange sense of peace. The Cara Empire was gone, but from its ashes, something more honest was growing. Victor and I were building something of our own, independent of the family fortune. We had been approached by Damian Lambert with an offer to back a new venture, Horizon Partners, a firm focused on ethical investment and transparent practices. I walked into our brownstone and found Victor in the living room, surrounded by floor plans for our new office. He looked up and smiled, and for the first time in years, I didn't feel like an outsider. I was exactly where I was supposed to be. But as I sat down to join him, my phone buzzed on the coffee table. It was a message from Zoe. Check the news. Alexander Hartley just filed for bankruptcy. The SEC found the link between his father's liquidation and the Cara merger. The dominoes are still falling. I looked at the screen, then at my husband, then out at the city skyline. The ripples were still moving, expanding outward, touching everyone who had been part of the lie. I realized then that justice wasn't just a single moment of impact. It was a process. And as I watched the sun set over Brooklyn, I knew that for the first time in my life, I wasn't just observing the story. I was the one writing the ending. I turned my phone off and set it face down. The fireworks were over. It was time to start the real work. The transition from a penthouse to a Brooklyn brownstone was more than a change in zip code. It was a total recalibration of my senses. The silence here wasn't the heavy, oppressive quiet of the Cara estate, but a living hum of a neighborhood that actually slept at night. Victor was in the kitchen, the smell of burnt toast a far cry from the gourmet breakfasts prepared by a silent staff. He looked at me over the rim of a chipped mug, his eyes bright with a project that didn't involve crushing a competitor. Damian wants to meet today, Victor said, sliding a tablet across the scarred wooden table. He sent over the initial vetting for Horizon Partners. He's serious about the backing. I looked at the screen, the numbers clear and unapologetic. Damian wasn't just offering money. He was offering a shield. He knew the Cara name was still radioactive in the financial district, and his endorsement was the only thing that would allow us to breathe. I felt a flicker of the old caution, the instinct to look for the hook in the bait. Why is he doing this, Victor? I asked, tracing the digital signature of Damian Lambert. Victor leaned back, his chair creaking. He told me it reminds him of his wife. She was an outsider, too. He said he watched her get picked apart by people who weren't half as smart as she was. He's not just investing in a firm, Hannah. He's investing in the people who had the guts to let the old world burn. I thought about Damian's steel gaze at the gala. He had seen me that night, the invisible wife standing in the corner while his daughter's future was insulted by a woman who thought she was untouchable. He hadn't just been angry. He'd been waiting for an ally. I'll get ready, I said, finishing my coffee. We met Damian at a small, discreet cafe in Lower Manhattan, miles away from the glass towers where the Hartleys were currently answering subpoenas. Damian didn't look like a vulture today. He looked like an architect. He laid out a map of the current market void left by the Cara collapse. People are looking for stability now, Damian explained, his voice low and resonant. They're tired of the flash. They want to know their money isn't being used to fund a $3 million wedding rehearsal while the foundations are rotting. We discussed the core of Horizon Partners, ethical oversight, and sustainable growth. It was everything the Caras hated. It was slow, it was transparent, and it was honest. As the meeting wound down, Damian pushed a small leather case toward me. A gift for the new office, he said. I opened it to find a vintage fountain pen. It was heavy, perfectly balanced, and felt like a weapon in my hand. My father built our company with that pen, Damian said quietly. He used to say that power isn't about the size of the check, but the precision of the signature. You have a very precise hand, Hannah. As we left the cafe, my phone buzzed. It was a notification from a local news app. The Cara estate had officially gone to auction. The floral arrangements, the custom furniture, the ivory wedding favors. It was all being sold to pay off the interest on the interest. Victor saw the screen and gripped my hand. "Let it go," he whispered. I looked at the fountain pen in my bag. I was letting it go, but I wasn't forgetting. The ripples were still moving, and I needed to be ready for the next wave. Because just as we stepped into the subway, I saw a familiar face in the crowd. It was Alexander Hartley, his head down, looking like a man who was discovering for the first time that the world doesn't stop for a fallen prince. He didn't see me, but the look of pure, concentrated resentment on his face told me the story wasn't as over as I hoped. The first month of Horizon Partners was a blur of 14-hour days and cold takeout. We were working out of a converted industrial space that still smelled slightly of machine oil, but the energy was electric. We had hired 4 analysts, young, hungry, and completely unconnected to the old guard. Every time a phone rang, I expected a process server or a threat, but instead, it was clients. People were coming to us because they knew we were the ones who had seen the rot first. I was finishing a late-night audit when my office door opened. It was Zoe Lambert, looking radiant in a sharp suit, carrying 2 bottles of expensive water and a file folder that looked far too heavy for a social visit. "You're working too hard," she said, dropping the folder on my desk with a thud. "It's our name on the door, Zoe," I replied, rubbing my eyes. "I don't want to give anyone a reason to say we're just another Kara shell company." "They wouldn't dare," Zoe laughed, but her eyes were serious. She opened the folder. "This is from the discovery phase of the Hartley bankruptcy. My father's legal team thought you should see it." I pulled out a series of internal emails between Alexander Hartley and Bianca. They were dated months before the gala. My stomach dropped as I read the exchanges. Bianca hadn't just been planning a wedding. She had been planning a hostile takeover of Victor's personal trusts. She was going to use the merger to strip her own brother of his remaining independence, leaving him with nothing but a title and a leash. Victor stood behind me, reading over my shoulder, his breath hitched. She was going to sign my life away before the first dance. "She didn't love Alexander," I whispered, realizing the full scale of the betrayal. "She just needed his shipping routes to trap you." Victor walked to the window, looking out at the Brooklyn skyline. All those years, I thought I was the one protected. I thought I was the one she cared about. "You were just another asset to her, Victor." I felt a surge of the old fury, the one that had sat in my chest at the wedding rehearsal when there was no place setting for me. The next morning, a letter arrived at the office. It was from a law firm in Switzerland. Bianca was contesting the seizure of her personal jewelry, claiming she had a signed affidavit from Victor giving her ownership of the pieces. "She's lying," Victor said, looking at the forged signature on the copy of the document. "I never signed this." I looked at the fountain pen Damien had given me. The precision of the signature. "She's desperate," I said, "and desperate people make mistakes." I called our lead investigator. "I want every communication Bianca had with the Hartley legal team in the 48 hours after the gala. If she forged this, she didn't do it alone." By the end of the day, we had it. A series of frantic texts to a low-level paralegal who had been fired from the Hartley firm. Bianca had offered him $50,000 to backdate a document she had mocked up herself. I didn't send the evidence to the police. Not yet. I sent a scan of the text directly to Bianca's cousin in Switzerland, the one running the finishing school. I added a simple note. "Etiquette starts with honesty. Perhaps your new teacher needs a lesson herself." The response was silence, but 2 hours later, the Swiss law firm withdrew the contest. The jewelry would stay in the auction. The final remnants of Bianca's status were officially gone. Victor sat at his desk, a look of profound relief on his face. He looked at me, and for a moment, I saw the man he could have been if he hadn't been raised in a house of mirrors. "You're terrifying," he said softly, I'm just precise, Victor. The grand opening of Horizon Partners' permanent office was less of a gala and more of a statement. We chose a space that was open, flooded with natural light, and devoid of crystal chandeliers. Damien was there, of course, standing next to Zoe, who had just been named CEO of Lambert Enterprises. Even Nathaniel showed up, looking remarkably comfortable in a suit that wasn't custom made. It was a celebration of things that shouldn't have worked but did. But as the evening progressed, I noticed a man standing at the edge of the room. He was wearing a delivery uniform, holding a small, flat box. He didn't move toward the bar or the guests. He just watched me. I walked over to him, my pulse picking up speed. "Can I help you?" He handed me the box and a clipboard. Signature required. I signed the electronic pad and took the box back to my private office. Victor was busy talking to a potential client, so I opened it alone. Inside was a single shattered champagne flute. The stem was snapped in half, the glass jagged and sharp. There was no note, but I didn't need one. I knew the weight of that glass. I knew the sound it made when it hit a marble floor. I looked at the security feed for the hallway. The delivery man was already gone. I pulled up the footage from the front door and zoomed in on his face. It wasn't a professional courier. It was Alexander Hartley. He wasn't coming for money. He was coming for a reckoning. I didn't panic. I called Zoe. "Alexander is in the building," I said, my voice as steady as the pen I used to sign the delivery. "He just sent me a warning." Zoe's voice sharpened. "My father's security is in the lobby. I'm calling them now." I walked back out into the party, scanning the faces. I saw him then, standing near the balcony doors. He had ditched the delivery jacket. He looked haggard, his eyes bloodshot, the eyes of a man who had lost his name and blamed everyone but himself. He saw me looking and didn't run. He gestured toward the balcony. I didn't go alone. I caught Victor's eye and whispered 2 words. "The balcony." We stepped out into the cool night air. Alexander was leaning against the railing, the city lights reflecting in his eyes like a forest fire. "You think you won, don't you?" Alexander rasped, his voice thick with resentment. "You and the Lamberts. You burned our houses down and built your little office on the ashes." "You burned your own house, Alexander," Victor said, stepping in front of me. "My father's lies and your father's debt were the fuel. Hannah just provided the match." Alexander lunged, not at Victor, but at me. He had a piece of the broken glass in his hand, but he didn't get far. Damien's security team was through the doors in seconds, pinning him against the railing before he could even close the distance. As they led him away, Alexander screamed over his shoulder, "It's not over. You'll always be a Kara to them. They'll never let you forget." I watched them take him toward the service elevator. I felt a coldness in my chest, but it wasn't fear. It was the final realization that Alexander, Bianca, and Nathaniel were all cut from the same cloth. They believed that the world owed them a throne, and anyone who stood in the way was a traitor. Victor wrapped his arm around me. "Are you okay?" I looked down at my hands. They weren't shaking. "I'm fine, Victor. I'm just glad I didn't wear white tonight." 1 year after the collapse, the world had settled into a new shape. The Kara name was a footnote in business textbooks, a cautionary tale about the dangers of unchecked ego. Alexander Hartley was serving a 3-year sentence for his role in the insider trading scandal and his subsequent altercation at our office. Bianca was still in Switzerland, though rumors said she had been fired from the finishing school for conduct unbecoming and was now living in a small apartment paid for by a distant relative. Victor and I were sitting in the Metropolitan Museum of Art's sculpture garden. It was a perfect June day. the kind of day Bianca would have demanded for her wedding. But we weren't here for a merger. We were here for Zoe. She was marrying James Porter, a literature professor who didn't know the first thing about shipping routes or stock options. The ceremony was small, intimate, and filled with people who actually liked each other. Damien stood at the front, looking older but remarkably at peace as he walked his daughter down the aisle. As the reception began, Damien found me near the fountain. "You look like you finally put the ghost to rest, Hannah," he said, raising a glass of mineral water. I looked at the happy couple dancing. Zoe's smile was genuine, her laugh echoing off the stone walls. "I think I have, Damien. I've realized that the best revenge isn't the downfall. It's the life you build after everyone tells you that you're nothing." Damien nodded. "My father used to say that karma doesn't forget an address. It just takes its time getting there." Victor joined us, handing me a glass of champagne. He looked at Damien and then at me, a quiet pride in his eyes. He had become a partner at Horizon, his ethical approach to business earning him a respect his father could never buy. Nathaniel was there, too, sitting at a table with a retired judge, talking about his community garden project. He had found a way to be a man without being a king. As the sun began to set, Victor and I stepped away from the crowd. We stood by the stone railing, looking out at the city that had once tried to swallow me whole. I thought back to the girl who had arrived at a rehearsal dinner to find no place set for her. That girl was gone. The woman standing here now had built her own table. I pulled the vintage fountain pen from my clutch. I had carried it every day as a reminder. I looked at the jagged scar on my hand from a piece of broken glass I'd kept, a reminder of the cost of the fight. "Ready to go home?" Victor asked, his hand finding the small of my back. I looked at the city lights, the horizon wide and inviting. "Yes, Victor, I'm ready." We walked out of the garden, hand in hand, leaving the ghost of the past behind. The ripples had finally stilled, the scales were balanced, and for the first time, the future wasn't a tactical maneuver. It was just ours. If this story resonated with you, leave a like and consider subscribing. You can also drop any comment below, even just one word. Maybe tell me where you're watching from, or what time it is right now. Sometimes one word is enough to say you were here.